Charles Munger spent decades observing how the world truly operates, and one principle emerged above all others as the foundation of extraordinary success. This principle was so fundamental, so transformative in its application, that Munger dedicated much of his teaching to helping others understand its profound implications. That principle was simple, yet powerful in its elegance: think long-term. The world, Munger observed, was filled with people desperately chasing quick results, quick money, quick recognition, and quick comfort. These individuals moved through life like hummingbirds, their energy frantic and their attention scattered. But Charles Munger taught that the best things in life rarely come quickly. They grow slowly, quietly, beneath the surface, accumulating strength and power through time's patient work. Long-term thinking, according to Munger, is the art of seeing value where others see only delay. It is the discipline of trading short-term pleasure for long-term reward, a trade that most people find emotionally impossible to make. When Munger reflected back over his extraordinary life, he could identify with absolute clarity that every meaningful success he had achieved came directly from patience and consistency. Munger did not get rich overnight. Charles Munger did not become wise overnight. Instead, Munger simply made a habit of doing sensible things repeatedly over a very long time. That was the entire secret. Munger observed that most people do not fail because they lack talent. Instead, they fail because they cannot wait long enough for their efforts to produce results. The market teaches this lesson every single day with brutal clarity. Munger watched investors panic during market downturns, selling good companies simply because prices fell for a few months. This was short-term thinking at its most destructive. The intelligent investor, according to Charles Munger's teachings, sees far beyond the next quarter or the next sensational headline. Such an investor understands a truth that Munger emphasized repeatedly: time is the friend of good decisions and the enemy of bad ones. You cannot force results into existence, but you can prepare yourself so that when time does its work, it rewards you generously. The same principle that Munger taught applies far beyond investing. Relationships, reputation, health, and knowledge all grow through patience and compounding. Munger insisted that you cannot build trust overnight. You cannot gain wisdom from a few quick reads. You cannot stay healthy if you expect results from just a week of effort. Everything worthwhile, according to Munger, requires years of steady, consistent attention. Long-term thinking also protects you from emotional mistakes, Munger discovered. When you are focused on the long game, you stop reacting to every little rise and fall in fortune. You become calmer, steadier, harder to shake. Most people live in a constant state of reaction, jumping from trend to trend, from excitement to fear, always chasing the next thing. But the long-term thinker, as Munger taught, knows that life rewards endurance, not intensity. You don't win by sprinting frantically, you win by lasting. One of the smartest things Munger and Warren Buffett ever did was simply deciding not to hurry. Charles Munger explained that they did not try to outsmart everyone else with complicated strategies. Instead, Munger and Buffett found good ideas and allowed time to do the heavy lifting. That was the great secret most people overlook. Patience is a form of power, Munger taught, that turns average decisions into extraordinary results over the decades. Consider the story of Roberto Santos, a businessman from São Paulo who came to understand Munger's teachings about long-term thinking. Roberto had spent 15 years in his family's manufacturing business, watching his father work relentlessly, always chasing the next contract, always rushing. When Roberto's father passed away, Roberto inherited the business and inherited the mindset of urgency. The business was profitable, generating millions annually, but Roberto felt constantly stressed, constantly behind, constantly worried that competitors were moving faster. His health suffered. His marriage suffered. His relationships with his employees became transactional rather than meaningful. Roberto woke up one morning and realized he was rich in money, but poor in everything else that mattered. He began reading Munger's work on long-term thinking. Munger's fundamental insight resonated deeply with Roberto. The fastest path often leads straight off a cliff. Roberto decided to radically change his approach to his business and his life. Instead of pursuing growth, he focused on sustainability. Instead of maximizing quarterly profits, Charles Munger's teachings showed Roberto how to think in decades. Munger explained that the best companies were not the ones that grew fastest, but the ones that grew steadily and could sustain that growth forever. Roberto applied this principle ruthlessly. He turned down lucrative short-term contracts that would strain his workforce. He invested heavily in employee training and development, understanding through Munger's teachings that long-term competitive advantage comes from the quality of your people. He established sustainable pricing that allowed for reasonable profit margins without destroying relationships with customers. The first year, revenue actually decreased. Roberto's board questioned his sanity, but Munger had taught him something crucial. The results of long-term thinking are invisible at first. By year 5 of Roberto's transformation, something remarkable happened. His employees had zero turnover, something almost unheard of in manufacturing. His customers became advocates, actively referring new business to him. His profit margins actually increased because his operation had become incredibly efficient. The stress that had plagued him for 15 years simply vanished. Roberto learned through direct experience what Munger had taught for decades. When you align your thinking with long-term principles, time becomes your greatest partner rather than your enemy. Roberto now spends his time reading, traveling with his wife, and mentoring younger entrepreneurs. His business runs beautifully on the systems and people he developed. This transformation, Munger would say, is what happens when you finally understand that wealth without peace is poverty, and that true success is measured in decades, not quarters. Charles Munger taught that one of the great traps in modern life is the illusion of quick success. Everywhere you look, people are chasing shortcuts. Get rich quick, get famous fast, get results instantly. Modern society celebrates speed and novelty, not substance and patience. But here's the truth that Munger revealed. Anything that comes too easily usually doesn't last. The things that truly matter, wealth, wisdom, character, take time, discipline, and endurance. When Munger was young, he learned quickly that the fast path often leads straight off a cliff. He saw people make a little money, get overconfident, and lose it all trying to double it overnight. He saw smart people jump into fads they didn't understand because everyone else was making easy profits. They mistook luck for skill, they mistook momentum for mastery. That's what happens when you confuse short-term excitement with long-term success, Munger taught. The illusion of quick success is powerful because it feels good. It gives you a rush, a story, something to brag about. But like sugar, it wears off fast and leaves you worse than before. The market is full of people chasing the next big thing, but the graveyard of business is filled with those same people who couldn't sit still. The truth, according to Munger's decades of observation, is that the big rewards go to those who can wait. When Munger talked about long-term thinking, he was not talking about doing nothing. He was talking about doing the right things again and again without needing immediate applause. Building a reputation, learning a skill, growing a business, raising a family, these are slow processes, but they create results that endure. Munger always believed it was better to build something that lasts a lifetime than something that burns bright for a year. The problem, Munger observed, is that modern society doesn't reward patience, it rewards noise. It celebrates the person who looks successful, not the one who actually is. Social media shows everyone's highlight reel, but hides the years of effort that made it possible. Because people don't see the struggle, they assume it doesn't exist. They think success is fast because they only see the final result. In reality, real success is quiet. It's slow, it's boring. It looks like showing up every day and doing the work without fanfare. It looks like reading when others are scrolling, saving when others are spending, thinking when others are reacting. It's not glamorous, but it's how lasting results are built. Consider Maria Oliveira, a woman from Rio de Janeiro who discovered this truth through Munger's teachings. Maria was a teacher with modest income, but she had a dream of becoming financially independent. She listened to conventional wisdom about get-rich-quick schemes, trading, cryptocurrency, real estate flipping. Every strategy promised quick wealth. But she stumbled upon Munger's writings on compounding and simple investing. Munger's core insight changed everything. The fastest way to wealth is rarely the best way, and the most reliable way rarely feels exciting. Maria began saving 30% of her modest salary. She invested that money in low-cost index funds that tracked the market. She did nothing else. No trading, no speculation, no complicated strategies. Her friends thought she was crazy. They showed her their cryptocurrency portfolios, their real estate deals, their complex trading systems. Maria watched some of them get rich quickly, but Munger's teachings had instilled in her a deep understanding of compounding, and she stayed the course. Over 20 years, something extraordinary happened. Her friends who got rich quick had, without exception, given those riches back to the market. Some lost money in crashes. Some made emotional decisions. Some were simply unlucky. But Maria, through disciplined application of Munger's principles about patience and compounding, had accumulated substantial wealth. More importantly, she had accumulated it without stress, without sleepless nights, without watching charts obsessively. She had simply allowed time to do the work. Today, Maria is financially free, retired at 50, and living exactly as she chose. Munger's wisdom about patience had not made her the wealthiest, but it had made her the calmest and most secure. If there's one principle that explains almost all lasting success, Munger taught, it is compounding. Most people think of compounding as a financial concept, how money grows when you reinvest your earnings. But the truth that Munger revealed is that compounding applies to nearly everything in life. It's the quiet, consistent force that turns small, smart actions into extraordinary results. Very few people truly understand compounding, let alone live by it. Albert Einstein supposedly called compounding the eighth wonder of the world. Munger never needed Einstein's validation to understand the idea. Compounding doesn't just add, it multiplies. It's not linear, it's exponential. The early stages feel slow, almost invisible. But over time, the results accelerate. That's why patience is such a rare and powerful advantage. Most people give up before compounding even starts working. When you save and invest wisely, your money compounds. When you read and learn daily, your knowledge compounds. When you make small improvements to your health, your relationships, or your discipline, those gains also compound. Everything worthwhile in life follows the same curve. Slow at first, unstoppable later, but only if you stay consistent. The trouble, Munger explained, is that compounding hides its rewards. You can spend years doing the right things and feel like nothing is happening. That's when most people quit. They move on to the next idea, the next opportunity, the next distraction. In doing so, they interrupt the very process that would have made them successful. The first rule of compounding, according to Munger, is never interrupt it unnecessarily. Munger often spoke of how he and Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway. They didn't do anything miraculous. Charles Munger made rational decisions, avoided big mistakes, and let time work its magic. People like to credit intelligence, but patience played the bigger role. Munger insisted that time turns ordinary efforts into extraordinary results, but only for those who can resist the urge to tinker, panic, or chase excitement. Compounding also works in reverse, Munger warned. Neglect and stupidity compound too. A small bad habit repeated for years leads to big problems. Debt compounds against you. Laziness compounds against you. Dishonesty compounds against you. The process doesn't care whether you use it wisely or foolishly. It simply magnifies whatever you feed it. Munger taught that if compounding is the engine of success, then impatience is the brake that stops it from working. Most people don't fail because they make terrible decisions, but because they can't wait long enough for good decisions to pay off. They destroy long-term rewards for short-term comfort. Munger watched this happen over and over again in business, investing, and everyday life. The cost of impatience is invisible at first, but it's enormous in the long run. Human nature hates waiting. We're wired for immediate feedback. That made sense when our ancestors were hunting and gathering, but it doesn't work well in modern life. Today, most worthwhile outcomes, building wealth, developing character, mastering a skill, take years, sometimes decades. The problem, Munger observed, is that people treat time like an enemy instead of an ally. They want progress to show up on their schedule, and when it doesn't, they start making emotional decisions that undo all their previous effort. In the stock market, Munger saw people hold a great company for a year, get bored and sell it for something more exciting. They forgot that excitement and success rarely go together. Or they panic when prices fall, even though that's when opportunities appear. They can't handle the waiting, so they trade patience for activity. In doing so, they interrupt the compounding that would have made them wealthy. Consider Carlos Mendez, an entrepreneur from Belo Horizonte, who learned this lesson the hard way. Carlos had built a successful software company over 7 years of disciplined work. The company was finally profitable, finally stable, finally generating real returns on his initial investment. But Carlos grew impatient. He saw opportunities everywhere, in blockchain, in artificial intelligence, in new markets. Munger's principle about staying focused didn't appeal to him. He wanted excitement. He wanted growth. He wanted to be wherever the action was. So Carlos sold his stable company at a reasonable profit and jumped into 3 different ventures simultaneously. He felt alive. He felt like he was in the game. Within 5 years, all 3 ventures had failed. Carlos lost most of his capital. More painfully, he lost years that could have been spent compounding his original success. He learned through bitter experience what Munger had taught countless students. Impatience has a hidden cost that doesn't appear on balance sheets. It costs you the time that makes compounding work. Carlos eventually rebuilt by finally applying Munger's principles. He started one business, stayed focused, resisted the urge to chase every opportunity. 5 years into that focused effort, he was back where he started. But now at age 50, with 2 decades of focus ahead of him, he understood what he had lost through his earlier impatience. That understanding, Munger would say, is more valuable than any amount of money because it teaches true wisdom. The same mistake happens in life beyond business, Munger taught. People quit reading because they don't see instant wisdom. They give up on exercise because the mirror doesn't change in a week. They abandon good habits because they don't feel rewarding fast enough. But that's like pulling up a seed to see if it's growing. You kill it by not letting time do its work. Impatience also has a psychological cost, Munger explained. It keeps people restless and dissatisfied. They're always chasing the next thing, the next job, the next gadget, the next thrill. They never stay still long enough to appreciate what they've already built. Munger always believed that true happiness comes from steady progress, not constant excitement. But progress requires patience, and patience requires faith. At Berkshire Hathaway, Munger and Warren Buffett made a habit of not rushing. They let time sort things out. Sometimes the hardest decision was to do nothing, but it was almost always the right one. The world rewards those who can wait and punishes those who can't. When Munger felt impatient, and he did because he was human, he remembered a simple principle. Time is either working for you or against you. If you stay calm and consistent, it compounds your effort. If you rush and react, it destroys it. The difference between success and failure often comes down to one simple question. Can you wait long enough for the right things to happen? If you want to live a good life, Munger taught, focus on your habits. Habits are the small decisions and daily behaviors that quietly shape your future. They compound just like money does, slowly at first, then all at once. Most people look for big changes, dramatic transformations, sudden breakthroughs. But Munger demonstrated repeatedly that it's the little routines repeated over time that build character, discipline, and success. You are in many ways the sum of your habits. When people asked Munger how to get ahead, he told them to develop good habits and let them do the work. Once a good habit takes root, it runs on autopilot. It saves you from having to make the same hard choice over and over again. You don't rise to the level of your ambition, Munger taught. You fall to the level of your habits. If your habits are sound, they'll carry you further than motivation ever could. Munger and Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway not through genius, but through consistent behavior. They didn't need to wake up every morning inspired or excited. They just followed a system that made sense and stuck with it for decades. The results came naturally. People underestimate how powerful that kind of routine can be, Munger observed. They want excitement and variety. But success usually looks boring on the surface. It's the same smart actions repeated patiently over time that create something great. The challenge, Munger explained, is that bad habits compound too. Every small act of laziness, dishonesty, or waste builds on itself until it becomes a heavy anchor. The person who eats poorly, spends carelessly, or refuses to learn is quietly compounding failure. It's not obvious in the short term, but over decades, the difference becomes dramatic. That's why it's so important to get your habits right early and protect them fiercely. The good news, Munger always said, is that habits are built the same way, whether good or bad, through repetition. Think of Juliana Ferreira, a young woman from Salvador who applied this principle of habits to transform her entire life. Juliana struggled with weight, financial stress, and lack of direction. She attended a seminar where Munger's teachings about habits were discussed. She realized that her problems weren't caused by one bad decision, but by thousands of small daily choices repeated over years. Her weight came from small daily eating habits. Her financial stress came from small daily spending habits. Her lack of direction came from not spending small daily time on learning. Juliana started small. She walked 30 minutes every day. She read one chapter of a meaningful book every day. She saved $1 every single day. These were almost laughably small actions. But Munger's principle about compounding was about to prove itself in her life. After 1 year of these small daily habits, Juliana had lost 20 pounds. After 1 year, she had read 12 books and developed genuine knowledge about business and investing. After 1 year, she had saved $365 plus compound interest. More importantly, these small habits had created a psychological shift. Juliana no longer saw herself as someone trapped in bad patterns. She saw herself as someone moving toward a better future. By year 5, Juliana was unrecognizable compared to who she had been. She had lost 70 pounds. She had started a small business based on knowledge she'd gained from reading. She had accumulated substantial savings and invested them wisely. Her confidence had grown steadily with each habit successfully maintained. The most remarkable thing was that it hadn't required superhuman effort. It had only required consistency. Juliana now understood Munger's insight deeply. You don't rise to the level of your ambition, you fall to the level of your habits. Another advantage of good habits, Munger taught, is that they free up your mind for more important thinking. When the basics are automatic, honesty, discipline, preparation, you can focus your energy on creativity and judgment. That's why Munger said the best way to make good decisions is to build a life where the obvious decisions are already taken care of by habit. You shouldn't have to make a decision every morning about whether to be honest. That should be automatic. You shouldn't have to decide whether to read or scroll. That should be determined by habit. You shouldn't have to decide whether to save or spend. That decision should already be made by your established patterns. So stop waiting for motivation or luck, Munger instructed. Start building habits that quietly move you forward every day. Read more, think clearly. Save money, stay rational, be consistent. These aren't glamorous actions, but they're the ones that compound into success over time. Habits become destiny, Munger taught. If you build the right ones, your destiny will take care of itself. One of the clearest signs of intelligence, Munger taught, isn't how fast you think. It's how long you're willing to wait. Delayed gratification is the ability to resist a small reward today for a bigger reward tomorrow. It's one of the hardest things for human beings to do, and one of the most important skills for building a successful and peaceful life. The world runs on instant gratification. People want everything now. Fast money, fast recognition, fast results. They scroll endlessly, chase trends, and mistake activity for progress. But what they're really doing is trading long-term growth for short-term pleasure. It feels good in the moment, but it compounds against you over time. Discipline feels hard now, but it compounds in your favor later. When Munger looked at the most successful people he'd known, and he didn't mean just financially, they all had one thing in common. They could wait. They understood that patience isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things and allowing time to do its work. They were willing to sacrifice comfort today for freedom tomorrow. They had emotional control, and that's what separated them from everyone else. The stock market is the best example. The impatient investor is constantly buying and selling, reacting to every headline. The patient investor buys good companies and holds them for decades. Over time, the patient one always wins, not because he's smarter, but because he's calmer. The same rule applies to life. The person who saves consistently instead of spending impulsively, who reads daily instead of scrolling endlessly, who eats well instead of chasing cravings, that person wins slowly but surely. Munger had said for years that it's remarkable how much long-term advantage people like him had gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. Delayed gratification is exactly that. It's the habit of saying, "not yet," when your emotions scream, "right now." It's the ability to zoom out, to think in decades instead of minutes. That kind of perspective is rare, but it's what builds real wealth and wisdom. Intelligence, according to Munger, isn't about knowing facts. It's about judgment. Judgment comes from experience, observation, and patience. Anyone can make a clever decision once in a while, but the person who can make disciplined choices every day over years will always outperform the one who's chasing quick wins. Consider Fernando Alves, a young trader from Brasilia, who learned this lesson about delayed gratification at great cost. Fernando was smart, fast-thinking, and hungry to succeed in the financial markets. He made money quickly through active trading, scalping small profits. He felt like a genius. He felt like he had cracked the code while everyone else was stupid. But Munger's teachings about patience and delayed gratification would eventually challenge everything Fernando believed about trading. 1 year of volatile markets, and Fernando lost most of his gains. He realized too late that his fast trading was generating fees and taxes that compounded to destroy his returns. More painfully, his emotional trading was creating losses at exactly the wrong moments. Fernando read Munger's teachings about delayed gratification and patient investing. He completely changed his approach. He stopped trading actively. He started buying good companies and holding them. The first year felt boring. He made no money while active traders around him were making quick profits. Fernando almost quit, but Munger's principle gave him strength. The longer you can wait for the right reward, the better your life becomes. Over the next decade, something remarkable happened. Fernando's patient approach generated substantial wealth, while most of his fast-trading friends had burned out or been wiped out by markets. Fernando learned through his own expensive education what Munger had taught. Delayed gratification isn't just intelligence, it's wisdom in action. The problem, Munger taught, is that society doesn't reward patience publicly. The benefits of delayed gratification are quiet and invisible for a long time, but eventually they become impossible to miss. You see them in financial freedom, in calm confidence, in strong relationships, and in good health. Whenever you're tempted to choose the easy thing, Munger instructed, remember this: the longer you can wait for the right reward, the better your life becomes. The ability to delay gratification isn't natural, but it's the one decision that compounds for the rest of your life. If you want to build a truly good life, Munger taught, you have to learn to think in decades, not days. Most people can barely see past a weekend. They make decisions for the moment, not for the future. But the longer your time horizon, the clearer your thinking becomes. When you stretch your perspective far enough, the noise of the present starts to fade, and what really matters becomes obvious. When Munger was young, he didn't plan to get rich quickly. He just wanted to make a few good decisions and let time handle the rest. That mindset made all the difference. The people who get into trouble are usually the ones trying to force results too soon. They want to skip the process, to harvest, before they've planted enough. But if you think in decades, Munger explained, you realize how foolish that is. Real wealth, real wisdom, real peace, they're all built slowly. At Berkshire Hathaway, Munger and Warren made every decision as if they'd have to live with it for the next 20 years. They didn't care about quarterly results or market trends. They cared about durability. Would this decision still make sense in a decade? Would this business still be standing? Thinking that way automatically filters out nonsense. It keeps you focused on substance over style, on value over excitement. The funny thing about thinking long-term, Munger observed, is that it actually makes your life simpler. You stop wasting energy on trivial things. You stop reacting to every small problem or distraction. You start asking, will this matter in 10 years? And the answer, most of the time, is no. That single question saves you from countless mistakes. It protects your time, your focus, and your sanity. When you think decades ahead, you also make better emotional decisions. You become less greedy in good times and less fearful in bad times. You understand that setbacks are temporary and that compounding takes care of the rest. Life becomes less about drama and more about direction. You realize that a calm mind compounds just like money does. Munger had always said that the best way to predict your future is to design it deliberately and patiently. If you read every day for 30 years, you'll end up wise. If you save a little consistently, you'll end up wealthy. If you treat people with fairness and respect, you'll end up surrounded by trust. It's not luck, Munger taught. It's math and time. The problem is that most people give up halfway because they can't see the finish line. Thinking decades ahead doesn't mean ignoring today. It means using today wisely, building systems, habits, and decisions that your future self will thank you for. Life rewards those who plant trees under whose shade they may never sit. That's the essence of long-term thinking. Consider Pedro Rocha, a grandfather from Recife, who discovered Munger's teachings late in life but applied them to his grandchildren. Pedro had built a modest business and accumulated some wealth. But he realized that the greatest gift he could give his grandchildren wasn't money, it was teaching them to think long-term. Pedro brought his grandchildren together and shared Munger's principles about patience and compounding. He gave each grandchild 1,000 reals with explicit instructions: invest this money in low-cost index funds and don't touch it until you're 50 years old. Most of the grandchildren thought Pedro was crazy. Why tie up money for that long? But a few took him seriously. By the time these few reached 50, their initial investment had grown to nearly 1 million reals each through the power of compounding. More importantly, they had learned from direct personal experience what Munger had taught. Time is your greatest ally if you give it the chance to work. The grandchildren who didn't follow Pedro's guidance made more money through active trading and business ventures, but they also experienced the stress and volatility that came with those approaches. The ones who followed Munger's principle about patience and compounding were not the richest, but they were the calmest and most secure. Pedro's greatest legacy wasn't the money he left, but the understanding of compounding and patience that he passed to the next generation. Patience is one of those traits that everyone admires, but very few actually practice, Munger taught. It sounds simple, but it goes against human nature. People want control, movement, and visible progress. They don't like waiting because waiting feels like doing nothing. But here's the paradox that Munger revealed. In many cases, waiting is the most productive thing you can do. Time is a force multiplier, and patience is what allows time to work in your favor. The world constantly tells you to hurry, act fast, don't miss out, seize the opportunity. That kind of thinking creates anxiety and foolish behavior. Munger saw countless people ruin good decisions because they couldn't let them mature. They plant seeds and then keep digging them up to see if they're growing. The truth, according to Munger's life experience, is that most of life's rewards are delayed. The harvest always comes later, but only if you protect what you've planted. Munger and Warren Buffett always believed that inactivity can be incredibly intelligent. They made a lot of money by waiting for the right deal, the right moment, the right price. In investing, doing nothing is often the hardest discipline to master. You can't force opportunity. You just prepare, stay patient, and wait for it to appear. When it does, you act decisively. That combination, extreme patience followed by extreme decisiveness, is a powerful formula. The same applies to life outside investing, Munger taught. The best relationships, the deepest knowledge, the most durable results, they all come from letting time compound your effort. Rushing ruins things that patience could have perfected. A good marriage takes years of understanding. Wisdom takes decades of observation. Even personal growth takes time because experience has to be lived, not just learned. The reason patience works so well, Munger explained, is that it filters out noise and emotion. Impatience makes people chase trends, panic at small losses, or quit when results aren't instant. Patience, on the other hand, gives you perspective. It teaches you to wait for the signal and ignore the static. When you master that, you stop being pulled around by the chaos of the world. You start operating on your own time, not everyone else's. Munger had always thought that real confidence is quiet patience. It's the ability to say, I can wait as long as it takes because I trust my process. The impatient person keeps changing direction. The patient person keeps improving direction. Over time, one ends up exhausted and the other ends up successful. Patience doesn't mean being passive, Munger taught. It means knowing when to act and when to hold. It means understanding that great results often look slow in the beginning. The world will try to tempt you into constant motion, but you have to remember that time is doing the heavy lifting. Learn to wait, not idly but intelligently. Keep improving while time compounds your effort. Because in the end, the real winners aren't the fastest. They're the ones who waited long enough for their decisions to bear fruit. When people think about long-term success, Munger observed, they often focus on money or business. But the truth is, your life is shaped far more by your relationships and your reputation than by your bank account. These two things compound just like wealth does, slowly, quietly, and powerfully. If you manage them wisely, they'll pay dividends for a lifetime. Munger always believed that a good reputation is like a precious asset, easy to lose, hard to build, and impossible to buy back once it's gone. It's built one decision at a time through honesty, consistency, and fairness. You don't build a reputation by grand gestures. You build it by doing the right thing over and over again, even when nobody's watching. That's how trust compounds slowly and invisibly at first, then all at once when people realize they can depend on you. The same principle applies to relationships, Munger taught. Every act of kindness, every moment of reliability, every bit of respect you show compounds into strength over time. A single honest conversation can save years of misunderstanding. A small favor done sincerely can create loyalty that lasts decades. It's not complicated, but it requires patience. You can't rush trust. You earn it inch by inch. Munger and Warren Buffett built their partnership on this foundation. They never needed complicated contracts or constant supervision. They trusted each other completely. That kind of trust doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of years of consistent behavior. They both valued integrity more than brilliance, and that made everything easier. The best relationships are simple because they're built on character, not cleverness. In a world obsessed with speed and self-interest, long-term thinking in relationships is rare, Munger observed. People burn bridges for short-term gain, a quick profit, a moment of ego, a careless word. They underestimate how small actions add up over time. Munger always said that the best way to get what you want is to deserve it. If you want loyalty, be loyal. If you want respect, be respectful. If you want trust, tell the truth. It's remarkable how consistent that rule is. The same goes for your reputation in business. You don't need to advertise good character. Over the years, people figure out who's reliable and who's not. Opportunities flow toward those who've proven themselves steady and fair. The world may look chaotic, but over the long run, it has a funny way of rewarding virtue and exposing deceit. Reputation and relationships are forms of capital, Munger taught, but unlike money, they can't be borrowed or faked. They require long-term behavior that matches your words. Guard them carefully. Invest in them daily. Never trade them for short-term advantage because once lost, they're almost impossible to recover. Think long-term not just about what you build, but about who you become. Because in the end, a good life isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by the people who trust you, the relationships that last, and the name you leave behind. Consider Beatrice Costa, a businesswoman from Curitiba, whose reputation became her greatest asset. Beatrice started a consulting firm, and in the early years, she faced enormous pressure to cut corners, overcharge clients, or misrepresent services to make quick profits. She could have done these things and nobody would have known, but Munger's teachings about reputation and long-term thinking guided her differently. She insisted on honest pricing, delivering more value than promised, and treating every client with respect regardless of whether they'd bring future business. During tough economic times, when many of her competitors were going out of business, Beatrice thrived. Her clients remained loyal. They referred their friends and colleagues. Her reputation had compounded silently into an invaluable asset. 20 years later, Beatrice could charge premium prices because people trusted her completely. Her reputation had become worth millions. She realized that the short-term profits she'd foregone by being honest would have amounted to maybe 10% more money early on. But the compounding effect of her reputation had generated hundreds of times more value over 2 decades. Beatrice now mentors young entrepreneurs, and her greatest lesson is simple. Protect your reputation as fiercely as you protect your savings, because over a lifetime, reputation compounds into far more value than any single smart investment. If you want to think long-term, Munger taught, you have to learn how to ignore the noise of the present. And believe him, there's never been more noise than there is today. The world is full of constant chatter, headlines, opinions, predictions, and distractions that pull your attention in every direction. Most of it doesn't matter, but people treat it like it does. They let short-term noise drown out long-term truth. Munger lived long enough to see this happen again and again. The headlines always change, but the pattern never does. One year everyone's certain the world is ending. The next year they're sure it's a golden age. People swing between fear and greed because they're trapped in the moment. They react to everything. But reacting is not thinking. Reacting is surrendering your judgment to the crowd. The smartest thing Munger and Warren Buffett ever did was learn to tune out that noise. They stopped worrying about what others thought, what the market said last week, or what was trending in the papers. They focused on fundamentals, businesses, character, and time. Over the years, they discovered that the quieter they became, the better their decisions got. Most people don't fail from lack of intelligence, Munger taught. They fail because they can't stay calm in a noisy world. Noise confuses people because it feels urgent. It demands attention. But urgency is not the same as importance. Most things that truly matter don't shout for your time, they whisper. The trick is to slow down enough to hear them. Munger had always said that the world is full of foolish gamblers, and they will not do as well as the patient investor. The gamblers are responding to noise. The patient investor is listening to reality. This applies far beyond investing, Munger taught. In life too, the noise will always try to distract you. Gossip, envy, comparison, and drama. All of it pulls you away from your long-term goals. The more you engage with it, the more you lose focus. Clarity comes from stillness, not chaos. You can't think clearly if your mind is always reacting. Another danger of noise, Munger observed, is that it creates false confidence. The more information people consume, the more they believe they understand what's happening. But most of what they're absorbing is irrelevant. The real insights, the ones that change lives, are timeless. Human nature hasn't changed. Incentives haven't changed. The basic laws of cause and effect haven't changed. But the noise keeps people chasing shadows. If you want peace of mind and sound judgment, Munger instructed, turn down the volume. Read less news but more books. Listen less to chatter and more to reason. Don't let the present moment trick you into forgetting the bigger picture. The world will always have noise. Your job is to stay signal-focused, to think clearly when others can't, to stay calm when others panic, and to keep walking your long-term path one quiet, rational step at a time. Most people fear failure so much that they never give themselves the chance to learn from it, Munger observed. But if you live long enough, you'll realize that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. Every life, no matter how successful, is filled with mistakes, setbacks, and disappointments. The difference between people who grow and people who stay stuck is simple. The wise learn from failure, while the foolish try to forget it. When Munger looked back at his own life, he made plenty of mistakes in business, judgment, and relationships. But he didn't try to hide from them. He wrote them down, he studied them, he asked, why did this happen? What did I miss? What assumption was wrong? That habit of honest reflection became one of the most valuable tools in his life. Failure, if you examine it carefully, teaches lessons that success never can, Munger taught. The problem is that most people look at failure through a short-term lens. They feel embarrassed, angry, or defeated. They let emotions cloud the learning process. But if you zoom out and take the long view, failure looks different. It becomes part of your education. Expensive, yes, but deeply instructive. Every error teaches you what not to do. If you can remember those lessons, you'll start to avoid the worst kinds of stupidity. Munger had said before that you don't have to be brilliant to succeed. You just have to avoid being consistently stupid. The best way to do that is to learn from your own mistakes. And if you're really smart, from other people's mistakes too. The world is full of patterns, the same human errors repeating over and over again. If you study them, Munger taught, you can sidestep a lot of pain. At Berkshire, Munger and Warren made their fair share of errors, but they made fewer large ones than most. They were always quick to admit when something wasn't working. They didn't let ego blind them. The worst failures are the ones you refuse to acknowledge. Denial compounds mistakes just like wisdom does. Facing failure head-on is how you stop compounding stupidity. You should also remember that failure is temporary if you keep learning. Time has a way of turning your worst moments into your best teachers. The lessons you gain from failure are the ones that stick because they're paid for in pain. But that pain becomes worth it if it prevents you from repeating the same error twice. Take the long view of failure, Munger instructed. Don't judge your life by a single mistake or a bad year. Judge it by how much you've learned, how much you've grown, and how many times you've gotten back up. Failure is inevitable, but defeat is optional. The people who win in the long run are simply those who refuse to let failure be the end of their story. Consider Lucas Montero, a young entrepreneur from Manaus who learned this principle about failure and learning. Lucas started his first business with tremendous enthusiasm, but terrible execution. The business failed within 2 years, losing his entire investment and nearly destroying his confidence. He could have quit, concluding he wasn't meant to be an entrepreneur. But Munger's teachings about learning from failure gave him a different perspective. Lucas studied his failure meticulously. He understood exactly what mistakes he'd made. He read books about business fundamentals that he'd ignored in his first venture. He took courses in accounting and finance. He spent 2 years learning from his failure. When Lucas started his second business, he was radically better prepared. The fundamentals were sound. The business model was rational. The execution was careful. Within 5 years, this second business was generating millions in revenue. Lucas was not the wealthiest entrepreneur in Brazil, but he was among the wisest. He understood viscerally what Munger had taught. Your failures are your greatest teachers if you have the courage to examine them honestly. Today, Lucas mentors young entrepreneurs, and his most powerful teaching comes from his failure. He tells them that the path to success isn't avoiding failure, it's learning from it and never repeating the same mistake twice. If you've listened carefully to everything Munger taught, you've probably noticed a common theme. The secret to a better life isn't about being brilliant or lucky or born with special talents. It's about thinking long-term, staying rational, and letting time work in your favor. That's it. Most people don't fail because life is unfair. They fail because they trade what they want most for what they want now. A better life doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. It's built from small, sensible decisions made repeatedly over years. Reading instead of scrolling, saving instead of spending, listening instead of talking, acting instead of complaining. These little choices compound quietly. One day you wake up surrounded by the results of thousands of smart decisions. It feels like luck, but it isn't luck. It's patience multiplied by time. The tragedy, Munger taught, is that people know this, but they forget it every day. The noise of the present distracts them. They chase excitement, shortcuts, and applause. They make impulsive decisions and then wonder why their lives are unstable. The truth is that life rewards those who play the long game. If you can think in decades, you'll make better choices than people who think in minutes. When Munger and Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway, they didn't have a master plan for quick success. They just focused on avoiding stupidity and staying consistent. They didn't let greed, envy, or fear guide their actions. They kept things simple and logical. Over time, that simple formula turned into extraordinary results. But the results weren't the real reward. The peace of mind was the ability to live calmly without regret or panic. That's what a better life feels like, according to Munger. Long-term thinking gives you that peace. It helps you stop reacting and start observing. You stop chasing what's popular and start doing what's right. You stop comparing yourself to others and start competing only with your past self. Slowly, almost invisibly, your life begins to improve. You build wisdom instead of noise, substance instead of appearance, character instead of ego. Munger always said that it's not supposed to be easy, but it is simple. Avoid what's dumb. Be patient. Keep learning. Save more than you spend. Choose honesty over cleverness. Take the high road even when it's inconvenient. Most of all, play the long game in every area of life: money, health, relationships, and knowledge. If you do that long enough, the results take care of themselves. The secret to a better life isn't hidden in any book or seminar. It's hidden in your daily behavior. The rewards of patience, discipline, and wisdom don't come overnight, but they always come. The clock is ticking anyway. You might as well let time make you wiser, richer, and calmer instead of bitter and regretful. So think long-term always, Munger would say, because in the end, time either compounds for you or against you. The choice, as always, is yours.